The girl was originally the envy of everyone in the rich family, but because of her mother died due to illness, cruel father will no longer love her. The ignorant girl doesn't understand any of this. All she knows is that soon after her mother left, her father found her a beautiful stepmother. But 9 out of 10 stepmothers are bad, and her stepmother was full of hatred for her, especially after giving birth to her sister. She became nobody's child, and everyone gathered around her sister. Growing up, she was very pretty but suffered from her father's indifference all the time. Her sister's verbal abuse of her was even more unrestrained, because in the eyes of her stepmother and sister, her existence is even less than that of a dog she keeps. The heroine's name is Miyo, and since she was a child, she has been working with the family's maids, and almost all the work has been given to her. However, one day, Miyo overhears the servants talking about themselves. It turns out that a nobleman has come to the house to propose marriage, so the servants are discussing which young lady the master is going to choose. Miyo is a little concerned, but she doesn't take it to heart because she already has a favorite. The man's name is Azusa, and his relationship with Miyo can be described as a childhood friend. The two of them like each other, but they have never broken the window. But that night, her father suddenly asks Miyo what she does during the day. After confirming that Miyo will not be going out, her father asks her to be home the morning after. At night, Miyo goes back to her room with the news of the marriage proposal on her mind, so she sleeps uneasily that night. The next day, Azusa arrives at the mansion again, and Miyo's whole being instantly becomes happy to see her favorite person in front of her. However, Azusa acts a little sad. Looking at him, Miyo had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. As expected, soon after Azusa left, the maid came to tell Miyo that her father is waiting for her. However, as soon as Miyo entered the room, she saw Azusa sitting next to her sister. Azusa is so remorseful that she doesn't even dare to look at Miyo. At this moment, Miyo felt more disappointed than ever. Was it really Azusa who came to the door yesterday to propose marriage? Immediately afterward, her father announced the marriage between the two families. Not only was Azusa being recruited as a son-in-law, but he was also going to inherit the family business, and he was going to marry his sister. Although she had expected it, Miyo couldn't help but feel sad. But what makes Miyo feel even more desperate is that his father is planning to marry him off to the Kudo family. However, the head of the Kudo family is known to be cold and unfeeling, and almost no one doesn't know about him. Upon hearing this news, his sister taunts Miyo again. Immediately afterward, her father ordered Miyo to pack her bags immediately and leave for the Kudo residence in the morning. Looking at Miyo standing in the rain, Azusa's heart felt especially hard. It turned out that he had learned of the marriage a few days ago, and that the adults of both families had taken it upon themselves to arrange a so-called family union for them. And as compensation for Azusa, Miyo was freed by marrying far away. Now, Miyo can only accept her fate. She goes to the cherry blossom tree planted by her mother to say her final goodbye to the family. Just then, Azusa comes to Miyo and apologizes. However, Miyo doesn't want to dwell on right and wrong anymore, because for her, maybe it's really time to forget about this relationship. But just as she's packing, the maid delivers a gift. It turned out that her father had prepared a brand new kimono for Miyo so that she wouldn't embarrass the family in her old clothes. The next day, Miyo puts on the only new dress she has and says goodbye to her cage-like home. And in a trance, her memories return to many years ago. At that time, her mother loved to stand under the cherry blossom tree in the courtyard. She could smell the faint scent of the flowers on her mother every time she was held in her arms. However, her mother suddenly passed away due to illness. From that day on, it was as if her father was a different person and never cared to be happy again. However, just one day, a strange woman suddenly came to the house. As a result, the father soon married her and had children. Since then, the whole family's attention has been focused on her younger sister, treating Miyo, as her older sister, as if she were a servant. But even so, her stepmother and sister continue to bully her, even cutting down her mother's cherry tree. Along the way, Miyo is preoccupied. She's afraid of losing the memories of her mother, but even more so, she's afraid that her new home will be just as suffocating. The tram soon arrives at the station, and she follows the map to find the mansion. Unexpectedly, the place was more plain than expected, so she gathered her courage and knocked on the door. She had thought that the people of the Kudo family were not good at talking, but the person who opened the door was a kind mother-in-law. She invited Miyo into her home with great warmth and gentleness. Although Miyo's uneasiness was eased, she still behaved cautiously when meeting the head of the Kudo family, not even daring to raise her head to look at him. If it weren't for her mother-in-law speaking up for her, she wouldn't have dared to raise her bowed head at all. But after just one look at the other woman, Miyo froze in her tracks because she was so beautiful and introduced herself gently. Although Miyo had no expectations of her engagement, she still saw the light in the hero's eyes, as she hadn't been treated gently for a long time. It was at this moment that her thoughts began to resist recalling things from the past. Because she was born into an alien family, her father couldn't wait to test her and her sister's alien abilities when they first learned how to do so. As long as one could see the alien thing in the box, one would be able to prove that he or she possessed excellent alien ability qualifications. Sure enough, along with the candles constantly going out, her sisters slowly began to go from calm to panicked. Compared to the calm Miyo, there is no doubt that her sister has successfully demonstrated her extraordinary ability. However, from that day on, her sister became a princess who was completely favored by everyone, while she was completely ignored. By the time Miyo opened her eyes again, she had unknowingly slept until dawn. Since it was still relatively early, Miyo went to the kitchen alone, intending to make a simple breakfast for the male lead. Coincidentally, however, this scene just happens to be witnessed by the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law is especially happy because having Miyo's help will make things much easier for herself. Although the feeling of being needed makes Miyo happy, when the breakfast she made is served to the male lead suddenly goes against the norm. Not only does he gesture for Miyo to sit beside him, but he also orders Miyo to test the rice for poison. Miyo feels aggrieved to see her intentions being misinterpreted. However, the hero doesn't give her any chance to explain. Because of his anger towards Miyo in the morning, the male lead, who is blaming himself, has no heart to work, and even his subordinates can see that he is not in a good mood. Although the hero already regrets what he did in the morning, he feels more and more guilty when he thinks that even his mother-in-law is defending Miyo. Was he really wrong to blame Miyo today? However, Miyo's side of the story isn't going well either, as she's especially afraid of being evicted and becoming homeless because of the anger she's caused the main character. So when the male lead comes back from work, Miyo goes ahead and kneels on the floor to apologize for what happened in the morning. Although the male lead explains that he just doesn't want to eat a stranger's cooking, he can't bear to look at Miyo's humble appearance. He then takes the opportunity of having dinner to ask Miyo not to keep the words of apology on her lips constantly. The hero tells Miyo that she doesn't have to be so careful and asks her why she didn't eat dinner. After learning that it was Miyo herself who didn't want to eat, he doesn't force her to. After dinner, he refuses Miyo's offer to help her boil the bath water. After all, it's faster to use her powers on her own. However, Miyo was in a state of self-doubt because of this. She couldn't even do the simplest things well. She was really a useless person. However, while Miyo is cleaning, the male lead suddenly apologizes to her through the door of her room. It turns out that his mother-in-law will be late for her vacation tomorrow, so he wants Miyo to be in charge of tomorrow's breakfast. And on top of that, the hero also prepared bath water for Miyo. Hearing this, Miyo's heart was both excited and a little overwhelmed. Although she hadn't been able to apologize properly just now, the thought of the tender look in her mother-in-law's eyes when she mentioned the hero made Miyo even more excited about the upcoming tomorrow. And as if in a trance, her thoughts began to flow. Memories from before came flooding back. Her stepmother not only took away her mother's jewelry and kimono, but also beat and scolded her in front of her sister. Not only did she trample on her mother's belongings, but she also locked Miyo in her room and wouldn't let anyone open the door. Her father stood outside the door and watched. So in order to stop being hated by her new family, Miyo purposely wakes up a little earlier than usual today. But just as she was preparing breakfast for the hero, her mother-in-law suddenly came into the kitchen. It turns out that her mother-in-law didn't take the day off at all, but the hero used her as a shield. With the help of her mother-in-law, today's breakfast becomes especially sumptuous. However, Miyo, who has always been disliked by people, is especially afraid that the male lead will not eat the food cooked by people like her. Her nervous heart becomes even more overwhelmed when she sees the hero picking up the soup he made. After hearing the hero's praise, Miyo can't help but cry out, and the hero asks her carefully why. The main character tells Miyo that she doesn't need to thank anyone in his family because they are all equal. It seems that Miyo has really met a good person, and her life should be much happier after that. And after that, what story will happen to her? We'll see you in the next episode.